Since Luke is telling the truth, then so are Mark and Matthew, because their Gospels tell the same basic story. Are you for real? Are you guys... This is an insult to the reader's intelligence. This is, wow. This book has made very, very stupid arguments. I think we've reached the pinnacle, and I hope that it's the apex. I hope they're going to get less stupid from here on out. But the authors have always impressed me with their ability to just make it worse. So I'm afraid that we're going to continue through this book and keep reaching new heights of foolishness and idiocy. Are you so serious right now?
When life throws you lemons, they say, make a YouTube channel, grab your God-free lemonade. In the depths of the dark, where shadows dance and sway, a satanic gospel, a twist in the charade.
We are back to the book that we love to hate. Here is chapter 10. This chapter is titled, Do We Have Eyewitness Testimony About Jesus? Please feel free to pause now and write your predictions in the comment section. This quote from Simon Peter, "We did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty." Are we already there? Is it for the Bible tells... Is it already that simple? The Bible says that there were eyewitnesses, therefore there were eyewitnesses? Let's find out. We have seen good evidence that the New Testament documents are early, so they meet historical test number 1. But what about historical test number 2? Do the New Testament documents contain eyewitness testimony? Let's begin by taking a look at the eyewitness claims of the New Testament writers. Yep, we're just starting there, for the Bible tells me so. Back when I was a Christian, I actually had an issue with this because some of the things that were written in the Gospels actually say that there were no witnesses or that the disciples fell asleep. So, for example, that verse where Jesus is praying so fervently that he starts to sweat blood. He looks back and realizes that his disciples fell asleep. So how did they know that he was praying to the point that he was sweating blood if they were sleeping? Who wrote this? It also mentions like an angel was in the sky and was giving Jesus some kind of, like a bard, just kind of, a rallying kind of cry or something, just helping Jesus have some kind of moral support. Were the disciples all sleeping then too? And it talks a lot about the different approach to the tomb. So who found the tomb, how did the tomb open, etc. And it's always mentioned that there were no witnesses here. Nobody was there. The guards were there. Angels showed up, made the guards fall asleep. The angels opened the tomb. But who wrote this down if nobody was there to see it? How did they know what happened? So even as a Christian, I had issues with this. And this is something, I brought up to my pastors, or I prayed about it, trying to, get the spirit of discernment or the spirit of wisdom, begging God to just explain how is this possible that nobody saw this happen, but somebody wrote down that it happened. And I never really had a satisfactory answer. So let's see what the authors have to say about this. If you accept the plain reading of the text, the New Testament certainly contains eyewitness testimony. Oh, okay, sure. I mean, if you accept the plain reading of the Quran, there's a lot of stuff in there that supports Jannah. Notice how many times various apostles claim to be eyewitnesses. Acts 2:32, God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of the fact. Acts 3:15, you killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead. We are witness of this. Acts 4:18-20. Then the rulers, elders, and teachers of the law called them again and commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John replied, judge for yourselves whether it is upright or whether it is right in God's sight to obey you rather than to obey God. For we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard. This is more Bible verses just saying we are witnesses, we're witnesses, we're witnesses. A witness of Christ's suffering. We did not follow cleverly invented stories, so this is actually the beginning of the chapter. More about the man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. Well, how do we know that? Unless he's talking about himself. We have seen the Lord. This is Doubting Thomas. Put your fingers in my holes and that kind of thing. That which is from the beginning, which we have heard, which we've seen with our own eyes, blah, blah, blah. Now the authors say, you get the impression that these folks wanted everyone to know they actually saw something, don't you? Furthermore, Luke and the writer of Hebrews claim to be informed by eyewitnesses. Luke 1:1-2. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Hebrews 2:3-4. This salvation, which was first announced by the Lord, was confirmed to us by those who heard him. God also testified to it by signs, wonders, and various miracles, and gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. In short, Peter, Paul, and John all claim to be eyewitnesses, and Luke and the writer of Hebrews claim to be informed by eyewitnesses. In addition, the New Testament writers name others who saw the resurrection. Paul specifically lists 14 people whose names are known as eyewitnesses of the resurrection, the 12 apostles, James, and himself. Well, I would disagree that Paul is an eyewitness of the resurrection. Paul claims to have seen Jesus, but this is after Jesus' ascension, so this is a bit... He had a vision at best. I don't know if that would be an eyewitness of the resurrection, as in, I knew Jesus, I saw him crucified, I saw his dead body removed from the cross and put into some burial chamber, and then I saw the guy walking around again. I think that would qualify as the resurrected Christ. To know that he died, see that his body was removed, see that this happened, and then see him walking around again. I don't think a vision counts as a witness to the resurrection. What do you guys think? And Paul also claims that there were more than 500 others. Yeah, the unnamed 500. Hey, just don't take my word for it. There's a lot of people that say this. 500 other people say it too. Matthew and Luke confirm the appearances to the apostles. All four Gospels mention the women as witnesses, with Mark identifying them as Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. Luke adds Joanna. That's 4 more. Acts 1 also reveals that Joseph called Barsabbas was an eyewitness in Acts 1:23, which is fine if anybody went to go check. You know what I mean? Who went to go verify this? Not only do the apostles claim to be eyewitnesses, on several occasions they tell their audiences that everyone knows what they're saying is true. These are not offhanded comments, but bold proclamations to powerful people. How do you know? Because people do this today. They say things like, I'm not the only one who thinks this, or ask anyone, or, you can ask any of my friends. There's a person that I've referred to before. Her name is Amber Reed, and she's a long-term YouTuber. She's been making YouTube videos about as long as I have. And one of the things she does frequently is lie. And she vlogs a lot of her life, and so she'll get caught in these lies. But as she's lying, she'll make these statements like, you can ask anybody, ask anyone who knows me. You can ask, and then she'll say one of her current girlfriend's names. Like, you can ask Destiny, this is true. No one's going to ask Destiny. And I could actually find Destiny's email address and attempt to contact her. But how am I supposed to go verify one of the unnamed 500 in a different city that Paul is referring to if he provides no names, no location, and no way to get in contact with these people? Am I able to contact Mary, mother of James? Am I able to contact Mary Magdalene? Were any of the people that they were preaching to able to contact any of these people? If not, then it doesn't really matter. They could say that the Emperor of Rome himself saw the resurrected Jesus. Who cares? I'm not going to ask the emperor himself. You know what I mean? You can ask any of the centurions that were present. I don't know any of the centurions, and I don't know how to contact them either. So just saying, oh yeah, check with so-and-so, that's just a way to kind of bolster a lie. That's not a way to verify something is true unless you provide a very specific way to get in contact with those people. And then you do get in contact with those people, and those people do reply to you to the affirmative. And that, again, is assuming that you actually did get in contact with them. It's not the person who's making the claim also lying and writing the letter to you, claiming that they're the other person. But I mean, there's a lot of layers to this just to take somebody like Amber seriously. And Amber doesn't claim to be the second coming of Christ. Amber doesn't claim to be God in the flesh. And even the stuff she says can't be taken at face value because she's a known liar. How can we take somebody at face value making these, as the authors say, bold proclamations? Why should we take anything they say seriously if we can't verify it? Just because they said so? That seems to be a bit strange. Perhaps the boldest eyewitness claim comes from Paul as he stands trial before King Agrippa and Governor Festus. Paul has just begun to tell Agrippa and Festus why he has converted to Christianity and how Christ rose from the dead as predicted by the Old Testament, when suddenly Festus interrupts and calls Paul insane. The dramatic exchange is recorded by Luke in Acts 26:24-28. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense. "You are out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. "Your great learning is driving you insane." "I am not insane, most excellent Festus," Paul replied. "What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with all these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice, because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? I know you do." Then Agrippa said to Paul, "Do you think that such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" This is... what? What do we prove here? So Paul is saying, yeah, even the king knows that I'm right. Isn't that right, king? Don't you know that I'm right? And the king said, "Paul, you're crazy." What does this prove? Hopefully the authors will let us know. Do you see how brave, almost brash Paul is? He not only boldly witnesses to the king and the governor, but he has the audacity to tell the king that he already knows Paul is telling the truth. That's something that liars will do too. Again, I even mentioned it. They'll say, "Oh, you know that what I'm saying is true," or "I know that you know," or "You've seen it for yourself," that sort of thing. And I know that there's been many times that Christians have said to me, they've said to other atheists that I've seen in social media posts, things like, "Well, you know in your heart that God is real, you just choose to deny him and then call yourself atheist because you want to go sin." So they will tell me to my face, "I know what you're actually thinking." That's bizarre. That's a bizarre claim, right? So if people, again, are going to be doing the same kind of thing today and get it wrong, why should we assume people of the past are any different? People are just people. Why is Paul so confident of this? Because the events of Christianity were not done in a corner. They were common knowledge and surely had not escaped the king's notice. Imagine a defendant challenging a ruler or judge that way. Such a witness must know the events he describes are well known. Or such a witness is just trying to make it seem like it's well known. There are times, again, when people who are trying to cover something up will pretend to be really open about it. Stuff like, there are people that they're not supposed to do different illicit substances while they're on probation, for example. And when the judge will ask them, "Are you doing any of those substances that you have been prohibited to do?" the person will say, "Absolutely not. Test me right now if you don't believe me." Thinking for some reason that saying, "Test me right now," it makes them appear as if they're telling truthful, because only a person who's clean is going to ask to be tested. So if I'm not clean and I ask to be tested, the judge is going to think that I'm clean. And of course that doesn't work. The judge orders the test comes back positive for different kinds of substances that these people aren't supposed to take. But that's where liars will go. They will openly say, "Go ahead and test me," because they know that's what truth tellers also say. The problem is, here we see in the verse that the authors are citing, the king says, "No." What? No. Do you think that, if the king had witnessed any of this stuff that Paul is claiming he did, the king would, of course, be Christian. Obviously, you just saw a guy die and come back from the dead and then be ascended into heaven. That's pretty freaking magical, right? That's pretty special. The king would at least acknowledge that this must be some great prophet, if not some kind of lesser deity or amazing deity if not the only deity or direct messenger of the main deity, right? So you would be some level of Christian, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But instead, the king says, "You really think that I believe this?" That's the king calling his bluff. That's the judge saying, "We did do the test, and you did test positive." That's what's happening here. I don't understand why the authors think this is some kind of slam dunk. This provocative approach is taken by several New Testament characters who are not shy about challenging their hearers to test the truth of their testimony. Again, yeah, judge, you can test me. For example, the other apostles, led by Peter, are just as brash and confident when they're questioned by angry Jewish authorities. Luke records the incident in Acts 5:27-32. Having brought the apostles, they made them appear before the Sanhedrin to be questioned by the high priest. "We gave you strict orders to not teach in this name," he said. "Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood." Peter and the other apostles replied, "Well, we must obey God rather than men. The God of our fathers raised Jesus from the dead, whom you had killed by hanging him on a tree. God exalted him to his own right hand as Prince and Savior, that we might give repentance and forgiveness of his sins to Israel. We are witness of these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him." I accidentally added his sins. There's no his sins. Forgiveness of sins. This account goes on to say the Jewish authorities were furious and wanted to put the apostles to death, but a well-respected Pharisee named Gamaliel talked them out of it. So again, so what? So they're being accused of doing a thing, and the guys are saying, so we gotta do what we gotta do. This, again, it just reminds me of a lot of interrogation footage I've seen where they'll have a suspect and they know the suspect did the crime because they have video, they've got text messages, they've got cell phone pings and all of this, but they don't let the suspect know that they have all this information. And so the suspect will say things like, "I wish there was a security camera that you guys could check, because if there was a security camera that you guys could check, you would see that I wasn't at the scene." And then one of the detectives might say, "Well, we do have access to security cameras. There are security cameras on that site." And the person may continue to try to bluff and say, "Well, yeah, then check them. You'll see that I wasn't there." Knowing full well they were there, and they were probably caught on the security camera. So they're bluffing in a way that doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? They're saying, yeah, check the security. They're obviously on the security camera. They committed the crime. They were there. But they're just hoping that by being really, really bold about it, nobody's actually going to call them out on it, and they can just lie their way through it. That's what this is really smelling like over here. The risk Paul, Peter, and the other apostles took, claimed that they were providing eyewitness testimony, certainly suggests that they were telling the truth. No, it suggests that they were making a claim. That's what it suggests. If these accounts are true, the apostles' unwavering testimony and provocative challenges demonstrate that they were eyewitnesses who really believed Jesus rose from the dead. I think I've made a pretty good case comparing it to modern-day criminals that make similar, "Oh yeah, test me now. Oh yeah, check the security camera. Oh man, I wish you could, These are pretty typical ways to lie. You know what I mean? These are just ways to bluff your way through something. So I don't know. I don't know what the authors think that they're proving here. Well, if they're being provocative, it means they really believe Jesus rose from the dead. Maybe. Or maybe they're lying for some reason. Or maybe this just got turned into legend. Maybe none of this really happened, or none of this really happened the way that it was written that it happened. But just over time, things kind of get embellished or misremembered, just accidentally, not even on purpose to suggest that they're actually lying, but maybe they misremembered it to a certain degree, But are these accounts true? After all, why should we trust Luke is telling the truth about these events? It's one thing to claim you're an eyewitness or have eyewitness testimony, and it's another thing to prove it. What evidence do we have that the New Testament writers were really eyewitnesses or had access to eyewitness testimony? Much more than you might think. Well, great. We should have just started there. Were they really eyewitnesses? Eyewitness evidence. Luke. Suppose someone wrote a book in 1980 describing your hometown as it was that year. In the book, the author correctly describes, please don't tell me this is the New York City Spider-Man argument, that because other parts are true, therefore this one extra piece of information is true. You know, New York City exists, therefore Spider-Man is real. Your town's politicians, its unique laws and penal codes, the local industry, local weather patterns, local slang, the town's roads and geography, its unusual topography, local houses of worship, area hotels, town statutes and sculptures. It does say statutes, not statues. Statutes and sculptures. The depth of the water in the town harbor, and numerous other unique details about your town that year. Question: if the author had claimed he visited your town that year, or said that he had gotten good information from the people who lived there, would you think he was telling the truth? Of course, and I agree, because he provides details that only an eyewitness could provide. That's the type of testimony we have throughout much of the New Testament. It is. It's the Spider-Man argument. New York City, therefore Spider-Man. Luke includes the most eyewitness details. And then this is in parentheses, while Luke may not have been an eyewitness to the resurrection itself, he certainly was an eyewitness to many New Testament events, end parentheses. In the second half of Acts, for example, Luke displays an incredible array of knowledge of local names, places, environmental conditions, customs, and circumstances that befit only an eyewitness contemporary of that time and events. Classical scholar and historian Colin Hermer chronicles Luke's accuracy in the book of Acts verse by verse. With painstaking detail, Hermer identifies 84 facts in the last 16 chapters of Acts that have been confirmed by historical and archaeological research. As you read the following list, we're not going to, keep in mind that Luke did not have access to modern-day maps or nautical charts. Luke accurately records, and the reason that we're not going to read this is, number one, it's just, I don't know why. This is sort of a, I don't even know if I'd call it a Gish Gallop, but it's just trying to throw, we got a lot of information, therefore it's totally true. But also, I'm not arguing that Luke may have been there. I don't think most people find this to be anything unique, that Luke knew about the local area, or that some of the authors write about what they know in terms of the kings or the region, the customs, etc. I don't think this is special. Nobody's questioning that Luke was in the area. We're questioning if Luke actually was witness to or can reliably relay information from people who claim to be eyewitnesses of a resurrected dude. I don't care that he understood appropriate means of custody with Roman soldiers. Nobody cares about that. We care, was there a Jesus that rose from the freaking dead? That's what we care about. So all of this is just here to pretend that the authors have more information to bolster their claim, kind of like they did with chapter 9. Is there any doubt that Luke was an eyewitness to these events, or at least had access to reliable eyewitness testimony? What more could he have done to prove his authenticity as a historian? Nothing. Nobody's arguing this. Roman historian A.N. Sherwin-White says, for Acts, the confirmation of historicity is overwhelming. Any attempt to reject its basic historicity must now appear absurd. Roman historians have long taken it for granted. Classical scholar and I'm not going to waste your time and mine with this, because it just seems like they're just trying to say Luke knows about the area. Okay. Now, here's where skeptics get very uncomfortable. Luke reports a total of 35 miracles in the same book, in which he records all 84 of these historically confirmed details. There it is. There it is. The Spider-Man argument. Hey, he mentioned, these specific street names and the mayor, so the 35 sightings of Spider-Man must be true, right? Absolutely. I mean, really, this is their argument. So the rest of this paragraph is just, the different miracles that he wrote about. Now, why would Luke be so accurate with trivial details like wind directions, water depths, and peculiar town names, but not be accurate when it came to important events like miracles? Nobody's saying he's inaccurate, quote unquote. They're saying that these didn't happen, or this was embellished, or he wrote something that somebody said, but this is just due to a bias or something. The reason that we understand that these things like Mediterranean navigation, or proper term of the time for the Adriatic, the severe liability on guards who permitted a prisoner to escape, etc., etc., these are because, as the authors cite this historian saying, Roman historians have long taken the Book of Acts for granted. So basically they're saying there's plenty of outside information, there's information written by other people at that time, there's information that we found in the archaeological record. All of this supports what was written by Luke, what was written in Acts. Do we have that with the miracles? Do we have any archaeological evidence of the miracles? No. And if we do, I'd like to see it. So this is a bit odd that they're actually making this argument. Because he was accurate with the depths of water, that means that everything he wrote down must be accurate. This guy can't embellish, this guy can't make it up, this guy can't be writing about something that interested him, or he can't be biased. In light of the fact that Luke has proven accurate with so many trivial details, it is nothing but pure anti-supernatural bias to say he's not telling the truth about the miracles he's recorded. No, he's proven accurate with these other details. There's a difference. He's proven accurate with these details. He's not proven accurate with the supernatural claims. He's just making supernatural claims. So to assume that we have to just accept it because some of the other stuff that he wrote can be verified by outside sources, that's a very bizarre claim, because I don't think the authors would accept this argument to believe in the Quran. You know what I mean? Okay, so this happened and this was correct and Muhammad got this stuff right, and the people that witnessed him speaking, they understood that Muhammad got this information right. All of this information is accurate for that part of the world at that particular time. Therefore, all these other things like Muhammad's night journey happened. I don't think the authors would agree to that, right? So why do they think we would? As we've seen, such a bias is illegitimate. Well, I don't know how we've seen it. They've made the claim, but they haven't really demonstrated it in other chapters. This is the atheistic world where miracles are possible because they've said so. These are just, you know what, that's the whole argument. We've defined this into existence. We've decided this is true. Therefore, all this other stuff is true too. That's it. We don't have to prove it. We can prove all of these 84 things that this historian talked about. We can prove that with outside information and archaeological findings. But this other stuff, these other claims, we don't have to prove nothing because we've already decided that we live in a theistic world. Wow. Even if you agree that miracles are possible, how do you know that Luke's writings are still accurate? Again, if you want to accept that miracles are possible, then how come you don't accept that Muhammad wrote on the Buraq and went up to Jannah to speak to Allah? How come you don't accept that? Isn't that a miracle too? And this is a theistic world where miracles are possible? You don't accept it because why? And for whatever reason you say, it's probably a similar reason that atheists are not going to accept this either. So it makes much more sense to believe Luke's miracle accounts than to discount them. Wow, that's it. They just said it. It meets our expectation for our worldview. It matches our worldview. Therefore, it makes more sense to believe that it's true, because we already believe this kind of stuff anyway. It's this exact type of thinking that actually helped me cross from nondescript religious believer over into atheism, because I realized if I wanted to try to explain to somebody what I believed and why, it kind of boiled down to all these supernatural experiences that I had. And then I didn't know if this person that I was speaking with, if they believed in the supernatural. And so if they would ask me, how do you know that what happened is supernatural? This is what I would have to explain. And I realized I couldn't explain anything. That the events in and of themselves were not supernatural. I just already accepted that a supernatural existed. I accepted that the spiritual world existed. So when these things that were pretty mundane happened, I accepted them as evidence of the spiritual world because I already believed in the spiritual world. Once I removed myself from that belief, that worldview, I realized that these events were just, again, pretty mundane events. And at that point, I couldn't believe them anymore. Without already assuming the spiritual existed, I didn't actually have any reason to believe in the spiritual. It was just an assumption, which is exactly what the authors are doing here, and that's why I'm able to see it so easily, because I made the same mistake. In other words, Luke's credentials as a historian have been proven on so many points that it takes more faith not to believe his miracle accounts than to believe them. Hopefully I've explained why that's not the case. Is Luke's gospel? What about the Gospel of Luke? First, we need to recognize that Acts and the Gospel of Luke are closely related books. How do we know? First, both documents contain the same Greek vocabulary and literary style. But more important, Luke addresses both documents to Most Excellent Theophilus. He was probably some kind of Roman official, because Most Excellent is the same title Paul used to address the Roman governors Felix and Festus. Regardless of the true identity of Theophilus, the main point is that Luke reveals that Acts is a continuation of his gospel. Okay, which is fine, but I'm just trying to read here, like, what's the point? Because that's what the authors are really doing. They've decided that they've got some kind of word count they're trying to hit, and it doesn't really work. Craig Bloomberg observes, a historian who has been found trustworthy where he or she can be tested should be given the benefit of the doubt in cases where no tests are available. Okay, but... so he's a New Testament scholar. I mean, bias or not, why would we give them the benefit of the doubt in cases where no tests are available? I would go with that if it's something like a hairstyle. That if Luke wrote something that the men had wore their hair blah 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 such and such way, as was the contemporary style, I would say, probably. You know what I mean? That's where we can kind of give that, like, well, you know, that's maybe this is a good place to start. Let's see if we can find any corroborating evidence. But, you know, if anybody's going to write any historical fiction or something, let's just use these hairstyles, because it's, you know, probably the case that, yeah, maybe this was the hairstyle at the time. But to then say, okay, therefore, miracles. That's just bizarre, unless, as the authors already explained, we already believe we live in a world where there's a theistic God and miracles are possible. Therefore, it's not a surprise for us to believe in miracles too if they're mentioned by Luke. But if we don't have that bias, we're not able to jump in there. Several details in Luke's gospel, that have been verified independently. Let's check this out. For example, Luke names 11 historically confirmed leaders. Who cares? Did Quirinus write about Jesus walking on water? Did Augustus write about exorcising an evil spirit from a possessed girl? Show me where Augustus says that. No? He then writes this at the beginning of chapter 3. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate, who cares? Again, it's the Spider-Man argument. Does this sound like Luke is making up a story? It sounds like he's setting the scene. So what? A writer who thus relates his story to the wider context of world history is courting trouble if he is not careful. He affords his critical readers so many opportunities for testing his accuracy. Luke takes this risk and stands the test admirably. This comes from Bible scholar F.F. Bruce. But again, how are we testing the accuracy of miracle claims? He's saying that, okay, we've tested the accuracy of those 84 points of non-miraculous claims. Why are we just going to go with him on miraculous claims? Who cares? Historical figures are confirmed by non-Christian writers. So what? I don't believe in Spider-Man, but Spider-Man talked about 9/11, and I believe in 9/11. You know what I mean? Like, just another detail. Okay. Luke 22:44. That's where Luke records that Jesus was in agony and sweat drops of blood. Look at this. Perfect. Great. Fantastic. Exactly what we were talking about. Apparently, Jesus was experiencing a rare stress-induced condition we know today as hematohydrosis. That's where tiny blood vessels rupture due to extreme stress, thus allowing blood to mix with sweat. Since Luke probably didn't know about this medical condition 2,000 years ago, he could not have recorded it unless he had access to someone who saw it. But again, they were all asleep. Oh my God. Okay. Love it. Details like this led William Ramsey to say Luke's history is unsurpassed in respect of his trustworthiness, blah, 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 blah. Since Luke is telling the truth, then so are Mark and Matthew, because their gospels tell the same basic story. Are you for real? Are you guys... This is an insult to the reader's intelligence. This is, wow. This book has made very, very stupid arguments. I think we've reached the pinnacle, and I hope that it's the apex. I hope they're going to get less stupid from here on out. But the authors have always impressed me with their ability to just make it worse. So I'm afraid that we're going to continue through this book and keep reaching new heights of foolishness and idiocy. Are you so serious right now that because we think Luke is telling the truth, because we already believe in miracles, therefore everybody else who had the same basic story is also telling the truth about everything that they said? Are you serious? Who can take this seriously? And this book is for atheists. This book is for people who they believe are going to be overly critical and overly scrutinized, etc., etc., and they're just tossing in junk like this. I wouldn't even accept this from my 10th graders. This is so bad. It's so bad. Oh, it's so bad. Ugh. This is devastating to skeptics, but the logic is inescapable. What logic? It's wishful thinking. What? You need a lot of faith to ignore. You need a lot of faith to think anyone's going to take this seriously. Oh my gosh. I mean, do we even want to read John? I guess we'll just scan it for what we can see as the best, quote unquote. The critics claim John is a much later work that expresses an invented deity of Christ theology, so it can't be trusted for accurate historical information. But if the critics are wrong, and John is accurate, then we have another independent witness to conclude that the basic New Testament story is true. What do they mean by basic New Testament story? That the time period? Or are they talking about the miracles too? How accurate's John? John appears to be an eyewitness because he has a lot of private conversations with Jesus. Evidence of nearly the same character for Acts. Okay, so again, archaeology confirms. Blah, 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 blah. Archaeology confirms. Another historian confirms. The topography confirms. Okay, so all this confirms. It's the same thing they're talking about. Again, the authors are just really excited about padding this out. This is how many freaking pages? What was that? Was that 4 pages? 5 pages? Are you serious? Look at all of this stuff that no atheist would actually care about. Because who cares? Nobody's arguing that the authors weren't writers of their time. Who argued that? This is a very strange... Is this a straw man? That's what this is? When we couple John's knowledge of Jesus' personal conversations with these nearly 60 historically confirmed and probable details, is there any doubt that John was an eyewitness, or at least had access to eyewitness testimony? It certainly seems to take a lot more faith to not believe John's gospel than to believe it. I mean, again, I'm not saying this author didn't exist at this time. Nobody's arguing that. They may argue if it was actually written by this person named John, if it was actually written by the Matthew or the Mark or the Luke, those are some arguments. But nobody's arguing that, oh, the authors weren't at this time. This is weird. These last 3 or 4, these are weird. These are not archaeological confirmed. Let's check them out. Number 58, the fear of the disciples to ask Jesus who he was is an unlikely concoction. It demonstrates natural human amazement at the risen Jesus and perhaps the fact that there was something different about the resurrection body. You mean good storytelling? Wow. This guy knew how to tell a story. Miracles. Number 59, the cryptic statement from Jesus about the fate of Peter is not clear enough to draw certain theological conclusions, so why would John make it up? It's another unlikely invention. Again, good storytelling? Seriously? That's it? That's really it? The fact that that's what... demonstrates natural human amazement. You mean like the natural human author writing about natural humans in his story? Really? Oh my goodness. They're really saying it's probably not made up because it feels like something that natural. That's the reason. Because it feels like something a person would do. Yeah, no, every time I've read fiction, it's just random stuff that nobody can relate to. It has no human emotion and human desires or human behaviors or anything in fiction. No human can relate to this. It's just made up, totally made up. That's such a bizarre argument. What? Historical crosshairs. Let's review what we found so far, okay? So, the basic historicity of the New Testament story, the authors feels confirmed, and the basic historicity they define as the life of Jesus and the early history of the church. Okay, cool. But there's even more evidence of historicity. Unless it's about the damn miracles, I don't care. The New Testament writers put historical crosshairs into their accounts by referencing real historical figures and their doings. All in all, this is in italics, like we're supposed to be impressed. There are at least 30 characters in the New Testament who have been confirmed as historical by archaeology or non-Christian sources. Who cares? Who cares? We're talking about the miracles. That's what we're talking about here. So it's just listing more. Herod and Pilate and Caiaphas. And then now we get a table. Oh wow, it's a table. Cool, table 10:1, which takes up a whole page. Again, I mean, if my students were writing this stuff, if I was asking them, please write about something from, I don't know, the time period of the Black Death and provide supporting arguments, and they wrote about some other thing. I actually had a student do this. They were supposed to write about concentration camps, and they wrote about like a biography of Hitler. In the biography of Hitler, they mentioned concentration camps, but the vast majority of the paper was about the biography of Hitler, about where he was born and his early life as a soldier and all of this other stuff. And I told the student, only about half of your paper actually mentions anything about concentration camps. Therefore, I can only give you 50%. You know, the paper itself it contains true information. You included properly cited sources, and that's fine. But it doesn't answer what I was asking. Please, I recommend that you rewrite it. You have a week. If you need more time, talk to me. If you need help with this, talk to me. You know, teacherly things. Here, the authors aren't touching on anything. As an atheist, I care about, are these guys eyewitnesses to miracles? How do we know? How can we confirm that these miracles actually happened? And instead, they're just talking about, oh, look at all the stuff that's not miraculous. Let's talk about that. You just get an F. You get an even lower grade that student would get. They included even fewer pieces than that student included. So, yeah, wow, the bones of a guy and the thing and the high priest. Oh my gosh, it's his bones. Yeah, they have his bones. Were his bones, I don't know, different DNA or something magical and miraculous? No? Okay, then who cares? They're bones. Who cares? The New Testament, a historical novel or novel history. Okay, maybe they'll talk about it here. A hardened skeptic might say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that the New Testament is true. I guess I'm a hardened skeptic, you guys. Suppose it's a historical novel, fiction, set in a real historical context, something similar to a Tom Clancy novel. There are many problems with this theory. First, it can't explain why independent non-Christian writers collectively reveal a storyline similar to the New Testament. Yes, it does. Like I said, even Spider-Man, there was a special edition for 9/11. If the New Testament events are fictional, then why did non-Christian writers record some of them as though they actually occurred? Where are the miracles that are recorded by non-Christian writers? That's what I care about. Something like, I don't know, Matthew claiming that there was a zombie uprising, that the crypts of the dead opened up and the dead walked into the city and were seen by many. That's one that we can talk about. How come there's no non-Christian sources of that? That's one that anybody would have written about, right? It's the same claim about Muhammad being able to split the moon in half. How come nobody else wrote about it? If it really happened, somebody would have seen it, somebody would have written about it, and they don't. It's just absent from all parts of history. Findings of ancient Egypt during the time that the alleged flood was supposed to have happened, this worldwide flood, and Egypt was totally flourishing. If it really happened, these miraculous things really happened, how come these are not written down by non-Christian writers or non-Muslim writers? Second, it can't explain why the New Testament writers endured persecution, torture, and death. Why would they have done so for a fictional story? It says more on this in the next chapter, they better bring up the argument of why would people fly planes into the World Trade Centers if they didn't really believe. Persecution, torture, and death, this is what happens to people of other religions too. This is not just Christians. And I know that Apologia, and I'm sure other people point out, but I just know Apologia the best, they point out there's no evidence that these people that they were punished for spreading this message of Jesus, and there's also no evidence that they would have been able to avoid punishment if they would have taken their testimony back. So this is all just kind of like, well, it's sort of like a church story. There's a lot of problems just with this short paragraph here. Third, historical novelists do not usually use the name of real people for the main characters of their stories. Yes, they do. What do you mean main characters? I mean, Pilate is a character. I wouldn't say he's a main character. I'd still say Jesus is the main character. I'd say the disciples are more main character. I would say Jesus' mom is more of a main character than Pilate. If they did, those real people, especially powerful government and religious officials, would deny the story, destroy the credibility of authors, and maybe take punitive action against them for doing so. Well, it's a good thing these were written with a pseudonym. They include historical leaders, whatever. Finally, the New Testament contains multiple independent accounts of these 9 different authors. Again, okay, who cares? This is not plausible. 9 different authors, the historical theory would require a grand conspiracy over a 20 to 50 year period between those 9 authors who were spread all over the ancient world. No, it wouldn't. It just would require that they had a belief, and then they wrote it down later, and that they mostly line up. I mean, even the authors here say that Mark and Matthew tell basically the same story. They don't say the exact same story, and I think we know why. The New Testament, one source or many. Wait, the skeptic might protest. You might have eyewitness testimony, but you can't believe the New Testament because it's just one source. There are not multiple independent accounts, as you say. No, I'm still saying, wait, you didn't demonstrate that the miracles are verified. You've pointed out other stuff that's verified, which is fine. That's to be expected of historical fiction, but you didn't provide any evidence that the miracles have been independently corroborated. This is a common error skeptics make because they fail to distinguish between the Bible as a religious book and the historical documents that comprise the Bible. Yeah, I mean, I'm not making this argument because I know that the Bible is not a single book. I know that there's different authors. I think most atheists know that. I mean, which atheist thinks the Bible's one book written by one person? The Bible's a collection. So again, these are just, we're just trying to distract us with something else. Let's see. Oh, their accounts describe the same basic events, but include divergent details. In other words, contradictory information. Why are divergent details important? Well, because if all of the accounts are from one source or a single editor, there would be harmonization, not divergence of details. Again, not contradiction. So they're just being fancy with that. So one of the contradictory things is just how many angels came down to help the tomb open up. But again, there were no eyewitnesses. So not only are these divergent details, but they're divergent details that no author could have known. So it is just a story they were telling each other. That's really it. And then they remembered it slightly differently when they put it to paper. So cool, it's just they're saying they're independent. 6 sane, sober witnesses who refused to recant their testimony even under threat of death, citation needed, would convict anyone of anything in the court of law, even without the additional lines of corroborating evidence that support the New Testament story. I mean, I don't know. It depends. 6 sane, sober witnesses who refused to recant their testimony even under threat of death. But we have to put it to an equivalent standard. If 6 people insisted that there was a UFO that abducted their cattle, and then dropped them down in different stages of butcher. Are we going to believe that they are sane and sober? Are we going to believe that they're all telling the same thing? Or are we going to believe that maybe this is a case of like ergot poisoning? Maybe they had some weird drug trip. Maybe they're not sane. Maybe one of them had a dream they thought was real and there was enough something that happened that this person was able to convince the other 5 that this is what happened, and they misremembered as if it had happened. You know what I mean? Like they created a false memory. And they would be sane and sober and insist and swear up and down, you know, you can put me to a lie detector, you could test my brain in an MRI, you can prove that I'm telling the truth, that kind of thing. I don't think that anybody would say, oh yeah, it must have been the aliens who took your cows and mutilated them. No, nobody would agree to that. This is something that is an extraordinary claim, so requires extraordinary evidence, right? We know the phrase. So I don't know why they're pretending as if it were mundane. They're able to say, look at all the mundane stuff we could demonstrate, therefore believe the supernatural. And if you don't believe the supernatural, it's because you're biased. No, it's because you haven't demonstrated that the supernatural even happened. And again, they would not accept this from any other religion as an argument. They would not accept, oh yeah, well you believe in the supernatural theistic worldview, therefore the Quran is true, and now you must be Muslim. They're not going to accept that. Summary and conclusion. Number 1, we saw that in chapter 9, New Testament documents are early, and there's non-Christian writers. Cool. In this chapter we conclude, notice that we didn't demonstrate, we conclude. The New Testament has stuff that is early and independent eyewitness stuff, major events with some contradictory details. There's historical figures that are real, and non-Christians agree that they're real. Luke includes 84 historically confirmed mundane details. Historically confirmed mundane details. Luke's proven trustworthiness means that Matthew and Mark must be true. Wow. John also includes some historically confirmed mundane details. Paul and Peter provide a 5th and 6th written testimonies to the resurrection. Well, I mean, you didn't demonstrate that or anything that, you didn't even say Paul and Peter can be trusted because look at all of the lines of evidence of other things that they said. You didn't say that. Since this early independent eyewitness testimony is within one generation of the events, the New Testament events cannot be considered legendary. Oh, no. I mean, have they not heard of cults? Have they not heard of cults ever? I mean, this is par for the course. This is par for the cults. You know what I mean? This is so not surprising if you know anything about cults. And the authors now conclude. So there's no question that real historical events are at the core of the New Testament. In italics, they say, the bottom line is that a skeptic has to have a lot of faith to believe the New Testament is fictional. No, it's historical fiction. However, there are more issues to investigate before concluding the New Testament is definitely historically reliable. Great. For example, how do we know that eyewitness testimony is not exaggerated or embellished? Fantastic. This is the question we'll address in the next chapter. I really wish you would have just addressed it in this chapter. What was the title of this chapter again? Do we have eyewitness testimony about Jesus? And what did they demonstrate? Well, at least we're going to accept what they're saying. That they have eyewitness testimony about other things. They have eyewitness testimony about behaviors that people like social culture. They have eyewitness testimony about Pontius Pilate. They have eyewitness testimony about topography. So we didn't even see if they had eyewitness testimony about Jesus. That was what this chapter was supposed to be about. And this chapter, how long was this chapter? This was 20 pages. And they didn't even address their main topic. Again, I would give them a 0. I would say you started off saying that you're going to explain this one thing, and instead you explain things adjacent to it, but you didn't provide any explanation of the thing that you set out to discuss. You need to redo your paper. This isn't even good writing. They're not able to stay on track. There's a lot of hand-waving. There's a lot of trying to, I guess, overwhelm people with additional commentary. I mean, I don't care if 84 mundane comments are historically accurate. I'm looking at the supernatural stuff. I'm asking about that. Why aren't we talking about that? That's what you promised with the title. But instead, they're just saying, look at all this stuff. Wow, you have to be crazy not to believe it. At this point, I do wonder who the editor was. This almost seems like maybe Frank wrote one chapter and Norm edits it, because they seem to be pretty consistent with how off track they tend to be. I can't believe that any actual editor, like a third-party editor, would have looked at this and said, hey guys, so, this is interesting information, but you mentioned that you were going to talk about eyewitness testimony about Jesus, and you're just talking about eyewitness testimony regarding topography and historical figures that aren't Jesus. Why is this not mentioned? And then for the authors to say, oh, because we're going to touch on that in the next chapter. Why wouldn't an editor say, maybe we need to change the title of this chapter, or maybe we need to just kind of reduce the size of some of this stuff and marry chapter 10 and 11 so this way we can get to the root of what you guys are trying to demonstrate here. I don't know why nobody stopped these guys. Do they have no editor? This really comes across as just people who don't know how to make a good argument, people who don't know how to stay on track. I would give them this tip that I give to my students, that if you guys are given a list of things that you want to, your teacher or professor wants you to include in an assignment, copy paste what that list is and change it to red. And then every time that you go through and do one of the things or finish one of the sections, change that point to green. And then when it's all green, do one final check to make sure it looks cohesive and then submit the assignment. I would give the same advice to the authors for them to have maybe an outline or some major goals that they want to cover. Something would count like the titles of each chapter. They did not do what they claimed to do. They didn't actually get to what any skeptic or atheist really cares about, and that's the actual supernatural claims. And how do we know we can take those seriously? Not good writing, just really, really frustrating stuff. With that being said, please feel free to tell me your thoughts. I know that some of you guys pause as you're watching and talk about your frustrations as well, so I do appreciate that. And some of you guys have done some different reading than I have, and so you've got a lot of really good information to share, and I do appreciate that. You guys can also check out the details section. There you can find different ways to get in contact with me, like our Discord or Twitter or Blue Sky. And you can also find the link to Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can join us and help buy me some coffee and headache medicine to deal with nasty books like this. In return, you get early access to videos without ads. You can also join us for our monthly live stream that we have at the last Sunday of every month. And if you're a free member, that's okay too. You get some of the same perks as well. And sometimes you are invited to join the live streams too. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this. And if not, I hope you enjoyed my frustration with this. And as always, thanks for listening.
In this unholy chapel, hear the whispers of the night where